All right, welcome over. I see we're starting to get people over from Breeze Stream. As you're coming in, please answer the poll question if you'd like to. We have a very specific reason why we're doing that particular question. If you've been watching any kind of the news lately, you should know about this. But somebody made a little USMLE style practice question. So before we get into the meat of today's stream, well, I booted myself. Here we go. Welcome in, Hive Raid. So here's the question for today. On the overlay is covering it. Hold on. There we go. All right. So here's the question of the day. RFK Jr. says he's not scared of germs because he used to snort coke off toilet seats. Years later, he develops fatigue and mildly elevated AST and ALT. Which of these viruses is most associated with intranasal cocaine use? So get your answers in the poll in the side chat, and we will discuss this later on at the end of the show. And maybe this will be a trivia question later on. But enough of that. We all know why we are here today. We are here to talk about raw milk. And as funny and stupid as this is, it has taken a really dark turn lately. And this isn't the first outbreak of infection from unpasteurized milk, but more recently, there was an incident in the state of New Mexico, where I'm currently located, where a newborn baby has died from Listeria infection associated with raw milk. And a lot of this has been it's been in the wellness community for a while, but ever since RFK Jr. has taken control of the HHS, it has become more and more popular because he is advocating for it. And if you aren't already familiar with the nonsense of this current administration, let me show you a fun little video. If you haven't seen this yet, I had to see this, so now you all have to see it as well. This is a video from RFK Jr. and Kid Rock this past week, talking about how America can be healthy again by working out. And I have to have it muted because of copyright, but here's the video in case you haven't seen it. So they're working out, which Kid Rock doesn't look like the type of person that ever really works out, but this is all a propaganda video. They got the eagle, they got the flag, they got their steak, all that stuff. And then they start working out. Yeah, they definitely think they look sexy, and they most certainly do not. Yeah, always take advice from someone who thinks working out in jeans is a good idea. And here they are in the sauna doing some really terrible push-ups. RFK Jr.'s form is actually okay. Kid Rock had pretty terrible push-up form. And then he goes in his jeans into his ice plunge, which I don't understand why he's still in the jeans when he does that. And then Kid Rock is in the hot tub, flexing his like no muscles. And then they're gonna play some pickleball because that's a trend. And then they jump in the hot tub and they're drinking some whole milk, probably raw milk, because this is RFK Jr. and Kid Rock. And that is it. That's the video. Make America healthy again. So that is what we are up against today. As we're talking about this, but that video was a little bit silly. But the topic we're discussing today is most certainly not silly, and very, very serious. So let's get into the meat of this issue. So if I can pull this up. Yeah, I feel so inspired right now. Yeah, if you don't feel inspired by that video, are you even a real American? Um, I know this font may be difficult to see, but getting into the raw milk issue, this is an article from February 3rd, 2026, which just followed an incident that the New Mexico Health Department is talking about here. So this is from Santa Fe. The New Mexico Department of Health is warning New Mexicans to avoid raw dairy products following the death of a newborn from Listeria infection. Health officials believe uh, the most likely source of the infection was unpasteurized milk the infant's mother drank during pregnancy. Big red flag right there. While investigators cannot pinpoint the exact cause, the tragic death underscores the serious risks raw dairy poses to pregnant women, young children, elderly New Mexicans, and anyone with a weakened immune system. Absolutely. And this is when RFK Jr. talks about make America healthy again, very, very rarely does he differentiate between different populations for the guidelines, right? Like, of course, when we think of guidelines, we think of what is going to be relevant to the majority of the population. And sure, we have different guidelines based on different populations. So, kind of the general guidelines for the population usually are focusing on adults, um, and usually younger to middle-aged adults, because older adults are in their own specific category, and similarly pregnant people are in their own category, and pediatrics are in their own category with multiple subcategories for different ages of pediatrics. So when people hear these guidelines, right, or they hear recommendations from some governing executive board or from a healthcare official, or in this case, the HHS official, saying that people should be drinking raw milk, somebody who doesn't know the differences between these population guidelines might say, oh, hey, I should do this, not thinking that this is different. The implications are different for pregnant people and for newborns compared to a healthy adult. And I'm not saying that raw milk is good for any of these populations. We'll get into why that is. But this is especially dangerous for pregnancy. And so, according to Dr. Chad Smelser, a deputy state epidemiologist for the New Mexican Department of Health, he says individuals who are pregnant should only consume pasteurized milk products to help prevent illnesses and deaths in newborns. Pasteurization is the process of briefly heating milk to high enough temperatures to kill germs. Simple enough. The fact that people think that this is uh, okay to just not do that is wild to me. And also that people think it's dangerous to do this to milk is wild to me as well. But we will get into that specific rhetoric in a little bit. Raw milk can contain numerous disease causing organisms, including Listeria, which is bacteria that can cause miscarriage, stillbirth, preterm birth, or fatal infection in newborns, even if the mother is only mildly ill. Listeria is also able to invade the bloodstream of people with compromised immune systems, causing serious infections and sometimes death. And Listeria actually is so serious that this is where we get into a lot of debates about should pregnant people or babies consume deli meats, because deli meats are often um, incubators for listeria. But with the regulations that we have, we're able to really control that those specific organisms that can cause infection. But it's unclear of, is this ultimately safe for young people? But there's a lot of foods that you shouldn't be eating while you're pregnant and while you're super super young, and it's important that we remember that. uh, and for people with compromised immune systems in general. Consuming raw milk products can also expose people to other pathogens, including avian influenza, so bird flu. You can get from eating consuming raw milk products, Brucella, tuberculosis, Salmonella, Campylobacter, Cryptosporidium, and E. coli. Some of these diseases are particularly dangerous for children under 5 and adults over 65. And it's very interesting here. This list of microorganisms that you can get from raw milk. Um, of course, bird flu is a weird one on there, but all of these can be very, very severe. And some of them you really would only expect to see in immunocompromised people. So tuberculosis, you really don't see um, in immunocompetent people unless they're in high risk areas, such as if they work in healthcare, if they have been to a country where tuberculosis is very common, if they're in a prison, a homeless shelter, places like that where TB is more likely to be found. But other than that, if somebody randomly gets infected with tuberculosis, oftentimes we think they have some sort of immunocompromise. Similar thing with cryptosporidium. That is a fungal infection related to the GI tract that can be very severe and cause death. And that one is often associated with HIV patients, specifically AIDS patients, because when you get to a point where you have such a destroyed immune system to where you can't fight back against this, it ends up being opportunistic. So, um, to see something like cryptosporidium in children who are not HIV positive, and also um, in adults over 65 who are for the most part immunocompetent, uh, is still like pretty scary. And then, of course, Salmonella, Campylobacter, E. coli, those are some of your big hitter GI infections. We're talking like GI bleeding. Uh, when we have the term dysentery, like if anyone has played Oregon Trail and you've heard of dysentery, like this person died of dysentery. Dysentery specifically refers to a diarrheal illness, and oftentimes a bloody diarrheal illness. And so it's very easy to bleed out in that point and also become incredibly hypovolemic, dehydrated, etc. So very dangerous. Although salmonella and E. coli can be pretty easy to treat if you get proper health care. One of the big issues with this that we'll get into, a lot of the community that buys into raw milk products is already averse to medical care. So if you have somebody who already has a deep distrust of the healthcare system, which many people reasonably do, but if people are against medical recommendations and just refuse to go get evaluated, uh, it's very likely that somebody who would get salmonella or E. coli from raw dairy would be less likely to seek out help for that. So that's also additionally really scary. But something else I want to mention here while we're talking about these specific microorganisms is that RFK Jr. is a terrain theorist. He denies germ theory, which is part of why he believes it's no big deal to snort cocaine off of a toilet seat, and also that he thinks that that's a reason why it's okay to drink raw dairy products and why he's not scared of germs. I mean, yes, that could be his logic, but also he just doesn't has expressed in the past that he does not believe in germs. Or he believes in germs, but he does not believe that germs are the cause of illness. He believes that your terrain, how you're taking care of your body, is responsible for whether or not you can handle an infection if you were to get one, which is in part true. If you are putting yourself in situations where you could be more highly exposed to illness, then yes. If you are doing things to reduce your likelihood of surviving an infection, like if you're not going to go get healthcare, if you're not cleaning yourself, like not bathing, could probably predispose you to more infections. Like, but people who get infected with these things are oftentimes not to blame for the infections that they get, with the exception of, raw milk. This is something we know that there is risk. Uh, there's a very high risk with drinking raw dairy. And so that one is something that we can control. And so why would we want ourselves to be exposed to these type of pathogens when we could just not? We have a great method of heating milk high enough to get rid of a lot of these risks. So that is what New Mexico has to say about this particular incident. It's very unfortunate. And this was a death that could have easily been avoided. And if RFK Jr. was not preaching the terrain model, anti germ theory ideas, if he was not advocating for raw milk consumption, this death may have not happened. And that is really upsetting to me, and it should be upsetting to the people running this administration. But let's get into some rhetoric, shall we? And this is about to get really bad. So I found a website And this is the Raw Milk Institute. So this is a lobbying and propaganda website advocating for raw milk consumption. And if you notice right off the bat, we have a child pouring some raw milk into a glass, which this is not safe for children. Stop using your children on these websites to make it seem safer. But here's what they say. They say science-based research and powerful testimonials. So they are going to try to lean into a science-based rhetoric here. But we will notice this is the same science-based rhetoric that is used by RFK Jr., Dr. Oz, to say that they are advocating for the gold standard science, which you can say it's gold standard science, but unless you actually can back that up, which they haven't, is it really gold standard science? No. But they'll try to sound more scientific so that people believe them. Because most people aren't going to go to this website and actually think through, are these statements true? How do we test these? Do we have data on this? And the answer is we have so much data about raw milk, and we're going to go through it, but they will pose their own studies as well. And we'll see kind of where they fall short in this conversation. So you can click on the links here to get to different sections. But at a kind of bird's eye view of this website, they have a section on the nutritional benefits of raw milk, scientific studies about the health benefits, lactose intolerance, and raw milk. So there's a claim that raw milk treats lactose intolerance, or that lactose intolerant people are not intolerant to raw milk. The two different types of raw milk, why raw milk standards matter, and then more resources and testimonials. And they have a little picture here with a kid saying the protective effects of raw cow's milk on infections were comparable to those of breastfeeding, which, yikes, we're already off to kind of a rough start. But I'll save this point for a bit later. All right, so their first point is that raw milk has nutritional benefits. So they say in many ways, raw milk is similar to breast milk. Both are completely natural, fresh, and unprocessed milk. So, all right. So the first point right off the bat that they get into is that raw milk is similar to breast milk. So trying to say this is very similar to what humans produce. And people often intuitively know that there are benefits to breast milk. And I'm not going to deny that. But to make that the highlight of your argument is a bit disingenuous. And then getting into the fact that they're both good because they are both completely natural, fresh, and unprocessed. So the assertion here, this is just giving a claim that because something is natural, because something is fresh, and because something is unprocessed, that makes it better. That makes it healthy. And I can think of several examples of where this is problematic, and I think you all in the audience can too. Let's think about things that are natural. Arsenic is completely natural. You can get some fresh arsenic somewhere, and you can get some fresh unprocessed arsenic. That must be amazing. Yeah, hemlock. We got hemlock that's completely natural, fresh, and unprocessed. We got raw meat. It's completely natural, could be very fresh, and could be unprocessed. Tobacco. Yeah, many examples of this. Dog poop. Dog poop is completely natural, fresh, and unprocessed. So should we start eating dog poop because it's natural, fresh, and unprocessed? No, absolutely not. So the fact that they're using that argument is appealing to a naturalistic fallacy, and therefore not a good argument to lead off with. But they're going to claim that they both both contain a wide variety of essential nutrients, fats, proteins, and anti-inflammatory and digestive enzymes, bioavailable vitamins and minerals, all in a natural form, which they have to emphasize the term natural once again, which is most easily utilized by the body. In addition, raw milk facilitates the production of lactase enzymes in the intestinal tract, allowing many people who are lactose intolerant to digest raw milk with no problems. Okay, so there's a claim hinting about the production of lactase. And I'll save that particular point for a bit later. But they have this chart here highlighting the similarities between raw human milk and raw goat or cow milk, and then the differences between that and pasteurized goat or cow milk, pasteurized almond milk, and pasteurized soy milk. So I like that they don't explain what beneficial enzymes they're talking about. Um, Lactase would be probably one of these, but they include lactase producing bacteria kind of later on and not your own endogenous lactase. But beneficial enzymes, unknown what they're saying these are. So that's a bit of a red flag when they're not even going to uh when they're not even going to explain what they're talking about. But the enzymes are active in raw human milk, active in raw goat or cow milk, inactive in pasteurized, none in almond milk, and none in soy milk. Okay, this would be helpful if I knew more about that. But I'll summarize a lot of these points and then I'll get into my particular take of this. Because even if I grant the points here in this chart, I still have a lot of concerns about using this as an argument that you're going to lean on as opposed to the risks. So, diverse probiotics. They're claiming that there's more diversity in active in raw human milk and raw cow or goat milk, and destroyed in pasteurized milk. They're also going to say that lactase producing bacteria are destroyed in pasteurized milk, but active in raw milk. Healthy fats are active, but they're damaged in pasteurized milk. Uh, uh, Essential proteins such as DHA, EPA, etc., damaged in pasteurized but active in raw. Proteins, just non-specific proteins, damaged in pasteurized, active in raw. Uh, Bioavailable calcium, bioavailable vitamins, bioavailable phosphorus, IgA, IgG. So here's something to really think about, right? So how much of the dietary nutrients are we getting from milk versus what are we planning on getting from something else? And also, how much is actually destroyed or damaged? They don't really give any hint of that. Um, because they don't expand on this anymore. So when they say that bioavailable vitamins are reduced, by what factor? Right? Wouldn't that matter if you're trying to make an educated, informed decision? Because if I reduce something by 0.1% or 0.0001%, that would still technically be reduced. But I could still include it under this reduced umbrella. So I'm not claiming that I know the amount by which these vitamins exist or by how much they're reduced. But I would think if you are making the claim, you have the burden to back up that claim, right? So if you're claiming that you should be drinking raw milk because the bioavailable vitamins are reduced in pasteurized milk, you would have to convince me that it's by a significant enough margin for it to matter, right? And what other things are we eating or should be eating in order to be getting vitamins, right? Like a lot of the vitamin D and other vitamins found in milk, we're not only getting from dairy sources, right? We're also getting from vegetable sources. We're also getting from protein sources. So to claim that that's a good reason is like, sure, even if I granted that there was some reduction, I can't say that this is a significant enough reduction to risk the other things listed above. And so, as we get into the data surrounding infection risk, let's take uh, a cost benefit analysis here, right? So, let's say that all of this is true. Let's say that there is, if I gave them the benefit of the doubt, that there is absolutely a nutritional benefit to raw versus pasteurized milk. Which one is going to be the least destructive and more helpful? Is it getting all of your specific vitamins and all of your healthy fats, your calcium, getting your immunoglobulins from raw milk versus pasteurized milk? Or is it avoiding infection risk? Like if I'm weighing out, which one of these is more favorable? Listeria. But let's also add Listeria, Campylobacter, E. coli, Shigella, Salmonella, tuberculosis, Cryptosporidium. Yeah, those just minor infections compared with, oh, but I could get some extra vitamins from having it raw. Like, do you see where this is not even a fair comparison? Like, sure, even if there were benefits, that does not mean that those benefits are worth the risk of dying from one of these very preventable infections. Studies about the benefits of raw milk. So they say that they have large epidemiologic studies that have found that raw milk consumption is correlated, or I could say correlated with lower rates of asthma and allergies, less eczema, lower rates of ear infections, fevers, and respiratory infections, increased abundance of the probiotic lactobacillus in the gut. And then they cite a few of the studies below. And so I think a lot of you in the audience know where I'm going with this is that they specifically and correctly use the term correlated. So correlation does not equal causation. So sure, we have a study here about asthma and allergies. Says this study of and so this is actually this is very important that we're going to get into in a second. And I might actually switch to a different article to go over some of the debunks of this in the previous section because it's very interesting. The language that is used in the study and the language used on this webpage are different and importantly so. So this study is the protective effect of farm milk consumption on childhood asthma and atopy. So atopy is it's like allergic reaction. So specifically IgE mediated allergic reactions, which is what is the kind of underlying cause of asthma and eczema and anaphylaxis. So, important thing to think about, if this is true, they have a study of 8,334 children, so pretty good sample size there, shows that consumption of raw milk is inversely associated with asthma and allergies, and concluded that consumption of any unboiled farm milk was consistently inversely associated with asthma, hay fever, and atopy in both exclusive and mixed farm milk drinkers. Early exposure and daily consumption of farm raw milk showed a stronger inverse association with health outcomes in mixed milk drinkers. So, problem here though is that again, this is farm milk, and it's not the they are wrongly giving the implication that farm milk equals raw milk because that's not at all what the study showed. The study was talking about farm milk, and I actually pulled up one of these studies about this. Not that one. Where is it? It might be in one of the other articles I have. Did I get rid of it? Oh, I think I closed it. That's why. Hold on. Is it this one? I can't find it in that. So let me see if I can oh, here we go. Okay. So this is actually an article from the FDA in 2024. So ironically, kind of during this administration, but this has not been taken down by the administration, at least not yet. So I'll just go through this specific section because we'll take things kind of point by point. So raw milk does not cure or treat asthma and allergy. So this is a slightly different study mentioned than the one in on the raw milk page. So this is the Parsifal study, and the other one was talking about the Gabriella study, although both were very, very similar. So the Parsifal study from 2007 has been misused by raw milk advocates ever since it was published. The Parsifal study found an inverse association of farm milk consumption and not raw milk consumption with asthma and allergy. The authors of the Parsifal study clearly indicated in the paper that the present study does not allow the evaluating the effect of pasteurized versus raw milk consumption because no objective confirmation of the raw milk status of farm milk samples was available. So they didn't have confirmation of which samples were raw and which ones were pasteurized. So the variable tested was farm milk. So getting milk from a farm. And in fact, about half the farm milk was boiled. The authors of the Parsifal study concluded that raw milk may contain pathogens such as salmonella or EHEC, which is a type of E. coli, specifically a hemorrhagic type of E. coli, and its consumption may therefore imply serious health risks. At this stage, consumption of raw farm milk cannot be recommended as a preventative measure. Regarding allergy, research has shown that raw milk and pasteurized milk do not differ in their anaphylactic sensing capacity when tested in both animal models and in human trials. Pasteurization conditions have little impact on casein structure and only cause limited whey protein denaturation. So, the part where they said that you're going to get reduced like natural protein content. And so you have casein and you have whey that are your primary proteins. And pasteurization has very, very minimal impact. So, yeah, where they say that you get denaturation of proteins in the pasteurized milk, it's by such a small margin that it really isn't significant, and at least not significant enough to risk getting bird flu or risk getting tuberculosis over. And so, yeah, something to really consider when someone's bringing up a study in all of this is, does the study actually say what it's claiming to say? So it tested farm milk, but it tested uh, boiled farm milk and unboiled farm milk, but that's not pasteurization. They did not test the difference between pasteurized milk and unpasteurized milk with regard to uh, anaphylaxis and changes in asthma and allergy risk. So missing that variable there to even be able to make that claim. For example, Host and Samuelson in 1988 compared the allergic responses caused by raw and pasteurized and homogenized pasteurized milk in 5 children who are allergic to cow milk. All children developed significant and similar allergic reactions from the consumption of the above 3 types of milk. The authors concluded that children with proven milk allergy cannot tolerate milk raw or pasteurized. So if someone has a proven allergy, they're not going to magically get better from consuming milk. And I will say a limitation of this 1988 study is sample size. Like that is a very, very small sample size. So you can't, with that sample size, you really can't prove, like you can't reject the null in that case. But with disregarding an entire variable, you also can't really reject the null. So we have the null in place. We have the null that pasteurized milk and unpasteurized milk are going to have similar properties as far as allergy reduction, which they even have to demonstrate that there is a causal relationship with this allergy reduction. We have association, granted an inverse correlation, but again, correlation does not equal causation. So we cannot reject that null until we have a study that gives a very convincing case for that. It's getting into an osteoporosis section. I think, did we get to the section on lactose intolerance yet? I don't think we did. Okay, so let's go over raw milk and lactose intolerance. So this is their article from February 5th, 2024. So ironically, this was like pretty much an exact year before this baby died from raw milk consumption. So yikes. So they say people choose to drink raw milk for many different reasons. Some are seeking to support local farms and connect with the places from which their food originates. Others want to make sure that animal welfare is a high priority in the production of their food. Some people choose raw milk for its delicious, rich flavor. I know some people drink it because, they just want a really, really good dose of Shigella in their diet for the day. And maybe they just want to experience bird flu for the first time. I mean, you gotta like pathogens are like Pokemon, right? So trying to catch them all. Some people are just missing that bird flu from their set, so they got to make sure they get it before they die. Um, and some people are legitimately drinking raw milk because of the claims that it reduces asthma, allergies, and eczema, which we already mentioned is a very bad reason to switch to raw milk. So they say that the Stanford study entitled "Effect of Raw Milk on Lactose Intolerance," a randomized controlled pilot study, assesses the effects of raw milk, pasteurized milk, and soy milk in 16 adults. The people participating in the study were confirmed to have true lactose malabsorption through the use of a hydrogen breath test. Over the course of several weeks, the participants in the study consumed successively greater amounts of raw milk, pasteurized milk, and soy milk in an 8-day milk phase for each type of milk, as shown in the figure below. The study found there was no improvement in lactose intolerant symptoms with the consumption of raw milk compared to pasteurized milk. So my question is, it says randomized controlled pilot study. It does not say if it was blinded or not. Was this a blinded study? Because if it wasn't a blinded study, that could be a point of bias and significant bias, especially people already were consenting to drinking raw milk for the sake of this study. Uh, okay, so they're at least admitting that there's some significant issues with the study. Although the Stanford study had often been cited as proving raw milk does not help with lactose. Oh, they're saying there's problem because it proves that raw milk does not help with lactose intolerance. Yeah, a sample size of 16 participants is small, and I would agree with that. And the sample size becomes more problematic when it's considered that 383 people initially signed up to participate. The reason why those people were not allowed in is because they were subjectively considered to be lactose intolerant. Oh, sorry, I can make the screen bigger. Here we go. Um, yeah, so not everybody was confirmed to be lactose intolerant, and so that would be a reason to exclude people from the study. Yeah, and so they're complaining. This article is complaining that 96% of the original volunteers were excluded. Yeah, because they didn't meet the criteria for the study. Like, you cannot include people who don't have a verified lactose intolerance in a study testing the effects of these different milks on lactose intolerance. Like, that would just be an even more problematic study. So, yes, the sample size is limited. Um, and of course, you're not gonna really be able to reject the null with that, and they didn't reject the null. This calls into question the use of the hydrogen breath test as an appropriate measure of lactose intolerance. Uh, it's clearly not a sufficient test for identifying people who experience digestive symptoms as a result of consuming milk. Yes, okay, this is a problem. The way that they're stating this, and I'm not gonna get too deep into this article because I want to get into discussing infection risk and not solely focus on lactose intolerance. But this is a problematic statement to say that the hydrogen breath test is an inaccurate method of measurement because it is not sensitive enough to include people who experience digestive symptoms as a result of consuming milk products. The thing, though, the study is not about who experiences digestive symptoms from milk products. That's not the study criteria. The study criteria was for lactose intolerance. There is a specific definition to be lactose intolerant, and that is that you cannot digest lactose properly, and specifically related to lactase. And so there are plenty of people who experience symptoms from consuming milk products, but that does not mean that they are lactose intolerant. So if we're going to make a study based on lactose intolerance, we have to standardize and make sure that every participant is lactose intolerant by the same definition. So if you were to subjectively say uh, that you're lactose intolerant and it's not confirmed, that could severely impact the bias of the study. So sure, we could argue how effective, how specific and sensitive is the hydrogen breath test. Because, right, if we think back to our series on um, statistics and hypothesis testing, which you can find those videos on that, I go into sensitivity and specificity. So, sensitivity is the ability of a test to detect everybody who has a particular condition, while specificity is the ability to rule out people who don't have the condition. So, with something that is highly sensitive, you risk a lot of false positives because you're trying to capture as many people as possible. But with specificity, you risk a lot of false negatives because you're trying to rule out as many people as possible. And so, what they're advocating for here is a highly sensitive test and a not very specific test. And so both of those would lead to a higher issue with both type 1 and type 2 error. And so that would inhibit uh that would reduce the predictive power of this study pretty significantly if they were to do that. So yeah, I agree that there are some limitations with the study that they're using. I do not think that the exclusion of people because of a hydrogen breath test is one of those limitations. And they're saying conversely, many individuals with perceived lactose intolerance do not experience malabsorption. Exactly. You have to standardize the study in order to prove any causal relationship. So even if there's somebody who's lactose intolerant that does not experience malabsorption, like that's still something to consider because the study again is about lactose intolerance and not necessarily about malabsorption. So there's that. And so they say that this Stanford study fell far short of answering the question of whether raw milk can be well tolerated by people who describe themselves as lactose intolerant. Which, okay, again, they are focusing so hard on the subjective labeling of lactose intolerant. So yeah, that it fell short of answering the question of does it help people subjectively, because that wasn't the point of the study. The point of the study was not to reduce subjective symptoms. It was to reduce lactose intolerance. So again, if we go back to their actual claim in their other article, it's that yeah. In the other article, they're even claiming that um the reduction in lactose intolerance is related to presence of lactobacillus. So they're specifically focusing on lactase producing bacteria, which is not subjective, right? Like the amount of bacteria you have, your ability to digest and absorb lactose is not at all subjective. And so in their initial about raw milk section, they talk about objective criteria. And then in this deep dive, they're focusing only on subjective criteria. And they're saying that the fact that the study is trying to use objective criteria is a bad thing. Tells me a lot about like this double standard they have for what gets to be legitimate data and what doesn't get to be. So as long as it's subjectively okay, therefore raw milk is better than pasteurized milk. Yeah, they're focusing only on reduction in symptoms, which is not. The reduction of symptoms is not a curing of lactose intolerance, and it is not managing lactose intolerance. It is just reduction of symptoms. And then, of course, their big section here is their firsthand account. So we have a whole section on anecdotes, which we know anecdotes are not evidence. So this person uh, says that lactose intolerance runs in their husband's family, coming through his father, and they've all had those issues. Prior to trying raw milk, they had symptoms and could only tolerate pasteurized milk if he took lactase enzyme pills, but now can drink raw milk. And so I'm wondering too, like anecdotes, we haven't really ruled out placebo effect in this as well. So how much of that is like accurate, and how much of it is placebo? Does this person have a confirmed lactose intolerance? Because a lot of times it is a more subjective diagnosis because it's not really worth like for most people that say they have a lactose intolerance, we're willing to just like oftentimes we're willing to just grant that because the management is take some lactase and maybe stop drinking dairy or like stop eating dairy products. Like there's no reason to do more invasive testing because the treatment's pretty easy to manage. So like we don't really have a way to standardize like whether this person is or is not truly lactose intolerant, but they had subjective benefits. So, okay, sure. If you want to stop drinking lactose containing milk because of subjective symptoms, that's fine. But I cannot, in good faith, recommend risking avian flu infection, tuberculosis infection, dysentery because of lactose intolerance. Yeah. And then they go into more information about surveys and then ancient populations. Yeah, large, and then they claim large body of evidence, and their large body of evidence comes from firsthand accounts and surveys. All right, so really, really low. So it's interesting. The double standard here, they have a very high threshold of evidence for the Stanford study, but very, very low standard of evidence for the anecdotes and surveys. So that should be a little bit of a red flag. All right, let's go back real quick to um let's go to a different page real quick because I wanted to go into the well, that's getting into infection risk, but I don't think it's in this one. I have multiple pages of stuff here. Not that one. Here, I'm just gonna go into this article and we'll kind of address as it goes because I do want to get into infection risk. Um Here we go. Okay. So this is a an article by Samantha Avina, and I think she has some kind of credentialing. So she is a PhD candidate at Rutgers University School of Graduate Studies Public Health Research Institute. Um, and this is published for the American Society for Microbiology. So, and this was published in on May 13th of last year. So she says, since the domestication of cattle documented approximately 8,000 to 9,000 years ago, don't tell the young Earth creationists about that. Cow's milk, a source of healthy fats, has been harnessed as an integral part of the human diet. More so, milk has shaped our gut health and the ability to digest foods around the world. However, prior to the introduction of pasteurization, these health benefits were also accompanied by significant risk. Historically speaking, milk consumption was often associated with severe disease outbreaks stemming from microbial contamination, and it was not until the 1860s that began to change. Pasteurization, a process of food preservation that involves adding heat to food items to kill disease-causing microbes and slow spoilage, was widely adopted by public health organizations and food handlers by the 20th century. It is arguably one of the greatest public health triumphs to date, as its implementation has significantly reduced transmission of foodborne illnesses. In spite of this public health and microbiological feat, the popularity of raw milk consumption has resurged in an ongoing public health concern in the United States. According to a PBS News report from 1998 to 2018, the US CDC reported more than 200 illness outbreaks traced to raw milk, which sickened more than 2,600 people and hospitalized more than 225. Still, raw milk consumption has been linked to false claims that make speculative assertions about its health benefits while downplaying the associated health risks. Exactly. And that's the point I'm trying to make. It like for the all the proposed benefits that it has, those greatly uh are diminished compared to the risks of raw milk contaminants. Um, Common bacterial pathogens in raw milk. So we kind of talked a bit about this. So we talked about Campylobacter, Listeria, account for almost 13% of pathogens found in raw milk batches around the world. Mycobacterium bovis, Brucella, and Salmonella are also common sources of raw milk contamination. These bacterial pathogens can cause serious illnesses such as tuberculosis, brucellosis, listeriosis, and typhoid fever. Bovine tuberculosis infection can lead to persistent cough, chest pain, fever, night sweats, weight loss, fatigue, and can become life threatening without treatment. Brucellosis causes undulating fevers. And when I say undulating fevers, like kind of similar even to um, like malarial infections, chills, joint and muscle pain, headaches, and profound fatigue. Infections can last for weeks or even months and may relapse if not adequately treated. Meanwhile, listeriosis poses a particular risk to pregnant individuals, newborns, and elderly, and those with weakened immune systems. Symptoms include fever, muscle aches, nausea, diarrhea, severe complications such as meningitis or sepsis, which both can be rapidly fatal, can occur in vulnerable populations. Similarly, typhoid fever leads to sustained high fever, abdominal pain, headache, and fatigue. Left untreated, typhoid fever can result in serious intestinal complications. Yeah, and avian flu, another issue that we kind of touched on. In February 2024, a strain of highly pathogenic avian influenza, H5N1, was detected in dairy cows for the first time. While the incidence was first reported in Texas, H5N1 has since been confirmed in dairy cattle in 17 states and counting. H5N1 has also been detected in raw milk. In one study, approximately 20% of pasteurized milk samples contained viral particle remnants. While no reports of raw milk to human transmission have been reported at the time of this writing, so a year ago, studies have shown that H5N1 can infect and make mice sick through consumption of infected non pasteurized milk. Amid a growing interest in the wider distribution and sale of raw milk in the US, the above findings about potential pathogens raise new concerns. While it remains unknown whether people can contract avian flu from raw milk, humans are susceptible to the disease. Yeah. So this is something that is a source of huge debate. Um, and I will go back to the other article in a second to address their arguments on this particular topic. So I'll read this section first, and then we will get into it. Oh, actually, let's we'll get back to that in a second. I'm gonna hit on this while we're on the topic, but they say that raw milk can be sold legally, but must meet very strict hygiene and safety standards. Raw milk can still be legally sold in different countries, but must meet very stringent regulatory requirements. For example, the EU mandates that raw milk for sale meet several hygiene and safety standards. These stringent regulations, which address equipment cleanliness, animal health, and proper milk storage and handling, help reduce the incidence of disease outbreaks. Um, Oh, there we go. I lost my train of thought for a second. Incidence of disease outbreaks, but cannot completely abate the risk of severe disease. This isn't true in part to factors, both intrinsic and extrinsic, that make testing raw milk batches difficult. The bacteria spores don't distribute evenly in milk samples, low inoculum levels at the timing of sampling, and insufficient daily monitoring of raw milk. Yeah, so if you test the milk at one point in time, are you detecting a part of it that has enough of the pathogen in it to detect? I'm gonna get into Ballerina Farm. Yes, Ancher. We're gonna talk about that. Um, Low levels at the specific time, because if you think about it, if it has the bacteria at a certain time, but you're not killing off that bacteria, it has time to colonize. And that's where we get more issues. If you test it at a point before it's colonized, but then it starts colonizing, that becomes a problem and can be an infection risk. And then not monitoring it daily. Yeah, so not catching it at the time that it does become a problem. And Miranda, thank you for the $10 super chat. Pasteurization is like vaccines. It has worked so well for so long that most people have never seen how bad it can be when you don't do it. Absolutely. That's absolutely the case with this. So they have specific hygiene regulations. saying that they have to inspect equipment and facilities. They have to have animals that are free from brucellosis and tuberculosis. They have to have a low total bacterial count and somatic cell count in the milk products. They have to have sufficient cooling requirements. It must be cooled to below 6 degrees Celsius or 41 degrees Fahrenheit immediately and maintain at that temperature. It has to be labeled as raw and labeled with boil before consumption or similar warning. And they have to be able to trace it back to the source herd so that they can document any issues that come with that. So there's a lot of rhetoric on this particular point, and there are recent issues with lack of control surrounding uh, raw milk producing dairy farms. And so before I get into Ballerina Farm, because we will be doing that, I wanted to touch on uh, a specific article from the previous website about raw milk versus pasteurized milk, and this is hilariously bad how they argue this. All right, so they cite a study called Whitehead and Lake 2018 Summary of Main Findings, which was not what they think it was. But let's get into it. So they claim that raw milk demand and production continues to grow, which is true. And they claim that there is no correlation between raw milk legalization and outbreaks. So here's the kicker. So this is related to legalization and outbreaks, not consumption. It's the study did not say that there's no correlation between consumption of raw milk and outbreaks. It was the legalization. So here's the thing, like if you're tracking only uh legal raw milk, right, you're having the majority of farms that are meeting the standards, and so you do have some quality control there. However, there's still a very, very high risk. And the way that they present the data here in this article is pretty disingenuous um, because they claim, or is it? They claim that there were more outbreaks with pasteurized milk than there were with unpasteurized milk. And they're going off of just the raw numbers. Uh, where is this? That's just a bar graph where here, let me share this one. So here they have a list of outbreaks from pasteurized dairy products from 1966 onward. And so they try to make this statement. Let me see if I can go to their specific statement. Oh, it's under their letter to medical professionals, I think. Okay. Mm, it's not actually that one. They have so many articles here, it is hard to find the tabs that I have open. Oh, it might be in this one? No. Sorry, guys. That's the lactose intolerant one. The Raw Milk Institute here. Learn. This is not helping me get to the thing. This is the page that we were on. Okay, so they're not actually there. But okay, but they have this article showing pasteurized the outbreaks in pasteurized dairy products because the argument is that because there are more outbreaks just by sheer number within pasteurized dairy products, therefore these things are equal and it's actually or even that it's safer to drink raw milk. But I want to pay attention to stats, right? And percentages and prevalence and all that stuff. So let's think about how many people in this country are drinking pasteurized dairy. How much production of pasteurized dairy is there? A lot. There's so much pasteurized dairy. And so if we say that what in 1975 there's outbreak of there's salmonella, the outbreak of 49 people were ill and then 2 people were hospitalized and 0 deaths. We have some listed here for Listeria for 45 people with 4 hospitalized, 0 deaths. One of the big ones in 1985 was salmonella with 150,000 people ill and 18 dead. Um, but you see these numbers also like there's a pretty significant downturn in that. And then those numbers up through the 2000s, we see a lot lower numbers. But if you just take the raw numbers of outbreaks or of people sick out of the entire dairy consuming population, 4 people or 18 people is such a small percentage compared to how many people are drinking raw dairy, right? So it's such a small percentage of people that are doing that. So when you have similar numbers to the outbreaks from pasteurized dairy, that's a way higher percentage of that population and actually very, very concerning. Um, when it's like when you're comparing equality between these 2 groups and then saying, "See, it's not problematic," you have to have a complete misunderstanding of the numbers. Like, okay, 4 people out of how many? Like 4 people out of 100 people is quite a lot compared to 4 people out of a few million. That's that's a totally different story. So we have a lot better control of infection risk with pasteurized dairy compared to unpasteurized dairy. And if you actually calculate out the statistics, you are 840 times more likely to get an infection from unpasteurized dairy than you are from pasteurized dairy. So don't let raw numbers fool you. Don't give into that line of reasoning because it is problematic. And that's really the only reason I wanted to share this particular article. But let's talk about where else this has gone wrong recently. So, how hard is it to actually standardize proper practices within raw milk dairy producing industries? So, Ballerina Farm was very popular in the media recently because of an outbreak associated with them and specifically their raw milk. This was located in Utah, and they made a statement on February 10th, so just recently. They say Ballerina Farm is a family run brand nestled in the fertile mountain valley of Kamasi, Utah. We deeply care about the Ballerina Farm products our customers consume and share with family and friends. We are committed to transparency, food safety, and responsible stewardship in all of our agricultural practices. You're committed to food safety, but you're going to sell raw milk. Sure. And we're sharing the following statement to clarify questions regarding raw milk sales associated with our farm. Producing and selling raw milk in Utah carries significant responsibility and is subject to strict state regulation. The Utah Department of Agriculture and Food oversees raw milk production and sales, including requirements for regular testing, routine inspections, and compliance with rigorous quality and safety standards. During the period in which Ballerina Farm sold raw milk, it passed the state's required testing. Additionally, Ballerina Farm never recalled any product, including its raw milk. raw milk that did not meet regulatory or industry standards was not sold and responsibly disposed of. Due to regulatory requirements, operational complexity, and economic considerations, we transitioned from selling raw milk to exclusively offering pasteurized milk on August 11th, 2025. So they're claiming it was an economic reason and not a safety reason, even though we know that there was an outbreak at Ballerina Farm. Let me see if I can get the stats on this. So yeah, so they had violations, two violations of routine milk testing, and which showed high levels of coliform bacteria, so E. coli bacteria. Um, so they failed to meet the safety standards, and this was so bad. Like they had such unsatisfactory results that they stopped selling the raw milk. So and they're saying this is for economic reasons and business reasons, and not because of the safety risks. But it seems like the fact that they stopped this immediately after failing to meet the standards was a contributing factor for this. And the family is still consuming raw milk. And it's funny because the woman who runs this with her husband, her name is Hannah. She claims that like one of her main reasons for drinking raw milk is because it makes your skin better. It's like, okay, so it's worth risking getting E. coli because it makes your skin feel better. And okay, priorities, people. But the raw milk website will also give an argument in favor of their in favor of raw milk because they're going to say that there are two different types of raw milk. And if you're drinking the wrong kind, then you're going to risk more infection. So they say that there's a difference. They're going to this okay, this is the article I was thinking about. They're going to claim a difference between the milk intended for pasteurization versus milk not intended for pasteurization, and claiming that there's more care and responsibility like put into food safety when it is not intended for pasteurization. And they're going to claim that uh, or pasteurized milk is allowed to have a lot more bacteria and stuff in it because it's meant for pasteurization, which is true. They are allowed a lot more leeway because of the fact that they're using pasteurization. So, this initial point, they're going to make an appeal to cows laying around in manure, and I'm in no way advocating for the mistreatment of animals. And I am absolutely opposed to um, like the milk industry for like animal rights and animal cruelty related issues. So yeah, I do not endorse the treatment of animals this way. But that is not the treatment of animals this way does not inherently make the product worse. And that because they have to lie and stand in manure all day, that the operation is therefore producing bad food. So they claim that raw milk is intended for pasteurization is typically sourced from concentrated animal feeding operations. Such milk is produced in conditions where animal health is compromised and mastitis is common. Antibiotics are often utilized in these herds, and hormones are used to stimulate higher levels of milk production. That's a separate argument for later, not really related to raw milk. Are hormones and antibiotics appropriate for use? The animals are housed in abundance of manure, and there's a corresponding high rate of pathogens. Sure, but also, just animal being around animal manure is going to predispose to higher rates of pathogens, and animals on local farms are also going to have risk of pathogens. This milk is intended to be pasteurized to kill pathogenic bacteria, and as such, is often produced with little care towards preventing contamination with pathogens. That is not necessarily true, and I do think that they are um, they're kind of implying that because the animals are treated in a certain way, that therefore they're going to have that they don't care about preventing contamination, which pasteurized milk also has to undergo testing and has to meet certain regulatory guidelines, which we'll get into. Even they are citing data about pasteurized products and how much how many pathogens are allowed in pasteurized products. So they're clearly being monitored, and we can debate about how ethical that whole thing is, but if you're meeting regulatory standards, I would say that that would be that they do care about preventing outbreaks. And furthermore, this type of milk is generally commingled with milk from multiple dairies, which increases the risk of pathogenic exposure. Studies have shown that up to 33% of this type of milk tests positive for pathogens. Sure, before it's pasteurized, that would be pretty reasonable. It's probably pretty similar to the amount of pathogens in raw dairy. Is clearly unsafe to consume. I never feed this type of raw milk to my family. Good, you shouldn't. But they're going to claim that the family visits the dairy that produces the raw milk that they drink, and they see a very different setting from the large commercial ones. So these are grass-fed cows. They look clean and healthy. The milk is bottled on the farm, and we can see the milk bottling room is clean and neat. There's stark contrast between these, and I'm not going to deny that you may have smaller farms that do a better job with animal treatment, but they claim that these are totally, completely different forms of raw milk and that the risk is completely different, to which we don't have data to suggest that. Because even if you manage the cleanliness on more of a smaller scale, that does not mean that you're eliminating the bacteria, right? Like you're still going to have that risk because animals inherently, like being around poop, uh, carry a lot of that. And especially these places that are so averse to using antibiotics, etc. Uh, I'd be curious to see, how that compares as well. But they say, although there are no federal standards for raw milk, the Raw Milk Institute has established common standards for raw milk that is intended for human consumption. So again, there's no federal standards for raw milk. There are standards. I think there's statewide standards, like each state has their own standards. There are way higher standards for pasteurized milk because that's the ones actually like really, really regulated and considered the most safe. So this is kind of a similar argument used by the supplement industry, uh, like and how they smuggle um, being able to say whatever they want about their supplements because they don't have those same standards present. So they say that the four main pathogens in milk that can cause human illness are E. coli, Listeria, Salmonella, Campylobacter. We already addressed that. It's estimated that 1/3 of the commercial dairy cows have mastitis, and the cows in those like stand and lie and manure all day, and they're claiming that that's the reason why. Which okay, you have to prove that that is the specific source of these infections and not something else. Granted, yeah, probably highly related. Um, But there's claiming that, on the other hand, the raw milk dairy environment is carefully managed to prevent pathogens in the milk, which we're seeing, though, that's not always the case. And there's a lot more micromanaging you have to do. And this testing may not be sufficient to adequately control this, right? We mentioned that if you're testing it when you may not be detecting a high amount of bacteria, but those can grow over time because you're not killing them. I have questions about how accurate this testing is going to be. And the fact that they're rigorously and frequently cleaning their milk machines, milk lines, and milk tanks, and also claiming that they're cleaning it frequently, but the commercial farms aren't. Like the only cleanliness argument they gave from the commercial farms was that the cows stand and lie in manure. Right? They're not, I mean, at least they're not making the argument that commercial farms aren't cleaning their equipment, because that would be a dishonest thing to say. But to say that, well, this group is doing so much better, and then not bringing an argument to really address those variables. Like, why bring up the cleaning equipment variable when that's the same on the commercial farm side? And also, the other thing too is they're not addressing the fact that raw milk isn't the only dairy produced from small farms, right? Like, that's something else too. You can pasteurize dairy from local farms. And so they're trying to make this more distinct uh, comparison. Like, so it's a lot easier for them to make their point when they say, well, we're better compared to these big unethical commercial farms. Sure. Okay, but what about the local farms that are pasteurizing? How do you compare that? Like, you can have farms that are grass feeding their cows, giving them the best quality of life, having the best cleanliness, best cleaning of their equipment, etc. How is that different from your raw milk? Um, you're still going to have those infection risks in the raw milk that you're not going to have in the pasteurized milk, and you're still going to have similar cleanliness standards. So, if you're going to make that point that the cleanliness is one of the big reasons for this, actually make that argument. Actually, steelman the commercial dairy industry, or at least steelman the local farms. Give us a good argument for this instead of just tearing down the easiest thing that you can. And then this next argument is really funny. So take a look at the milk filter shown below. So I'm just expected to believe that these pictures are exactly what these people say that they are. Even with just a quick look, it's apparent that the milk being produced with the intent to be pasteurized and is not clean, whereas the milk filter from the intentionally produced raw milk looks impeccable. Uh, yeah, and they even admit, okay, they admit here, to be fair, there are some dairy farmers who produce milk for pasteurization that is much more hygienic than most others. So that kind of debunks your other point that the raw milk, it doesn't inherently make it cleaner. However, that milk is still commingled with milk from other dairies, many of which are likely not, which no, not necessarily, not necessarily true. But either way, their argument here, they say, well, look, I have pictures here. I'm not going to tell you the source of these pictures. I'm not going to tell you which farm they come from. I'm just going to tell you that one comes from a raw farm and one comes from a conventional dairy producing facility. And they're going to say, well, some of these filters are clean and some of them are dirty. I'm not entirely convinced that these filters are used on the left. And like, sure, the ones used on the right are dirty, but also look at the surface that filter is on. It's on a dirty floor. Like, they set it down on the floor like it's a wasted thing. So like, these are clearly set up to not be equal images. Like the one on the left, it has 3 different filters. They barely look used. Like, there's a little bit of wet on it somewhere. But who's to say that those weren't like filtered multiple times, and maybe these were the filters used in a subsequent filtering, right? Like, the more times you filter it, the more gunk is going to get out, and then the cleaner the filters are going to look on as you use new filters. So like, what if they used cleaner filters on the left side, and then they use the first filter for the picture on the right side? I don't know how honest this comparison is. And they don't even show which place they come from, so the company that they took it from can't come back and say, well, actually, no, here's what happened. Like, they can't give a statement on it because they don't tell us where they came from. They just tell us one's a raw farm and one isn't. And look at how dirty the filters are. In all fairness, another point would be, your filter's not dirty. Did it actually filter anything out? Like, the filter on the right, if that's the filter like before and after, maybe it did its job, because there's residue like and dirt on the filter and not in the milk product. Maybe the filters on the left side are so clean because all the dirt went through to the final product. I don't know. Like the point is, you can't really make any determinations based on these images. It's a problematic argument for those reasons I just mentioned. And then this is where it gets really funny. All right, so comparison of bacterial test standards for two types of raw milk. So they say that, okay, I'm going to get technical here. If reading about standards and looking at charts is not your thing, you can skip ahead. So clearly they're tailoring this to people who are not educated in science, because they're like kind of even getting a little condescending about like, it's okay, sweetie, if you don't like to look at charts, it's okay. If you can't read big words, it's okay. You can skip ahead. Like, come on. Yeah, so they're talking about different types of uh measuring bacteria. So the standard plate count and the coliform count. So the standard plate count is the measure of total number of aerobic bacteria present, and high SBC numbers can indicate dirty milking equipment, poor milk chilling, and or poor udder preparation. Coliform count indicates how much E. coli or similar bacteria are going to be present, and so you have to meet certain criteria in order to be allowed to send your milk to market, which is totally fair. So they're claiming that, according to the PMO, pre-pasteurized milk is allowed to have 100,000 colony-forming units of bacteria per milliliter in SPC's testing. PMO does not have a standard for how many coliforms are allowed in pre-pasteurized milk, but the state of California allows coliforms up to 750 CFU per milliliter of milk. In comparison, the Raw Milk Institute common standards, which are just the Raw Milk Institute standards. Again, these aren't even accepted standards. This is just their standards. Call for less than 5,000 CFU per milliliter for SPC testing and less than 10 CFU per milliliter in coliform testing. As you can see in the chart below, intentionally produced raw milk is measurably quite different from pre-pasteurized milk, which and even meets stricter standards than pasteurized milk. There's a freaking reason for this. Like, and this argument had me face palming so hard before the stream, because that's exactly the point. The point is pasteurization. Because in one of these examples, the milk is going straight to market, and those colonies of bacteria can keep growing, right? Even if you've less than 5,000 CFU and less than 10 CFU of coliform, that can increase. And that's why the standard has to be so low, is so that you don't allow it to get out of control for raw milk. Whereas, like, because you're not killing it, you're not killing any of those off. They're going to remain in the milk kind of as the consumer gets it. But yes, you're naturally going to allow a higher amount of bacteria in pre-pasteurized milk because they're going to die. And that amount of bacteria is not going to persist. I mean, they might persist, but they're not going to be alive. They're not going to be able to infect people. So that amount is not going to be there after pasteurization. So I'm not sure if they think their audience is stupid. I mean, clearly they have some evidence in the it's okay if you don't want to read charts. They think people who are reading this are stupid. But do they think that they're so stupid that they're not going to understand that pasteurization kills bacteria? And so, yeah, coliform standards comparison, they're like, wow, look at how bad pasteurized milk is because it's allowed to have this much bacteria, because they're going to die. They're not going to be around. But this 1.6 CFU and this 10 CFU are going to persist in raw. Those are going to be around, and those are going to increase and could get even higher than that 100,000 CFU as you're using it. So that's just like, yeah, they put this into numbers down at the bottom. So the number of samples tested, 234, pathogens tested, 1, total number of pathogen tests, 234, 25% of them, the samples had pathogens. And again, this is pre-pasteurized, so this is before the milk was treated. And in the raw ones, they say that they tested 174. They tested for 4 different pathogens. They did 696 tests, and 0% of the samples had one or more pathogens. So think back to my points though recently about why this still isn't comforting. All right, let's go back to this article here. So we talked about that. Okay, so let's recap again about the purported health benefits of raw milk. So, despite known health risks and the fact that pasteurization offers an extremely safe and effective way to avoid them, raw milk advocates cite an array of false health benefits associated with consuming untreated dairy products, including the proposal that raw milk possesses superior nutrients, beneficial enzymes and vitamins, possesses the potential to reduce the risk of allergy and asthma in children, and undergoes reduced processing. As a result of this circulated misinformation, raw milk popularity has seen a resurgence in the US. However, several of these claims have been demystified or outright refuted by scientific studies. And they do have a link to the FDA and a list of references to where they got this. So the claim: raw milk retains beneficial enzymes and vitamins. Public health takeaway: pasteurization slightly reduces some nutrients, but overall, milk remains highly nutritious. Key nutrients like calcium and protein are unaffected. Even though the Raw Milk Institute claimed that protein and calcium were affected, they're not affected in a significant amount for it to be meaningful. Raw milk advocates have raised concerns about the impact of pasteurization on the nutritional content of milk. One 2011 study addressed the claim that pasteurization strips milk of its vitamins and other nutrients. Scientists conducted a systematic review and meta-analysis of 40 other studies evaluating the impact of pasteurization on vitamin content for vitamin A, B1, B2, B2, B6, B12, C, E, and folate, and found that some of the vitamin levels were modestly diminished. However, the effect of pasteurization on nutritive value of milk was nominal, and many of these vitamins are naturally found at relatively low levels in milk to begin with and are primarily maintained through consumption of other food groups. Yeah, exactly. So if you have a low level in milk already and it diminishes by a little bit, it's not really impacting the reasons why people drink milk that much. Additionally, repeat testing had demonstrated that minerals such as calcium and phosphorus remain stable and are not altered during the pasteurization process, further debunking this claim. Getting into probiotics, which this one was funny because I looked into this as well. So the claim that raw milk has natural probiotics for good for gut health. So sure, but is having the probiotics worth having the addition of other pathogens that could kill you? Not really. And you can go back in and add you can add probiotics back to dairy products afterwards. Uh, Pasteurization does kill natural bacteria, but it also eliminates harmful pathogens. Probiotics can be added safely through fermented dairy, e.g., yogurt. Absolutely. Yeah, Boner, you're seeing the quiz question, which we'll get into the answer of the quiz question at the end of the show here in a minute. But we addressed mitigating allergies and asthma. Yeah, there's no conclusive evidence to support this claim. Many lactose intolerant people react to both raw and pasteurized milk. Lactose-free milk is a safer option. And the claim that raw milk may reduce the risk of allergies and asthma in children. And the takeaway is there are some observational studies, but the findings are not strong enough for health policy. Raw milk carries infection risks. Yep. So they go into the Parsifal study as well. And of course, our favorite claim that I already addressed, that more natural and less processed is better. And of course, pasteurization is a safety step. Um, and their claim here, getting into what we just mentioned about industrial dairy practices being unsafe or unhealthy. And they're saying exactly the same thing I said, that food safety systems are tested and they are regulated and monitored to prevent outbreaks. Raw milk can vary widely in quality. So yeah, you can have some farms that are doing better and some that are doing worse. And no guarantee that you're getting one of the better ones. We already know about that. Yeah, take home message, raw milk is dangerous. The fundamental risk far outweighs any alleged health benefits, many of which are only anecdotally supported and not backed by scientific evidence. In fact, some raw milk health claims are outright misleading, not true, or taken out of context and can put people in danger. Science is clear that the implementation of milk pasteurization has been a critical tool in keeping us safe from harmful microbes while utilizing helpful microbes to better our gut health. Absolutely. Yeah. So I agree with a lot of this. So that is pretty much the meat of this show. But I want everybody to be able to see the answer to the poll question. So let's see what the votes were. We had in the vertical stream, we had 19% vote for hepatitis A, 19% for hepatitis B, 38% for hep C, and 25% for CMV. And then in the horizontal one, we had 4% for hep A, 12% for hep B, 35% for hep C, and 50% for CMV. All right, are you ready to see the answers? I actually have to share the other one now with the answer on it. All right. And the answer is hepatitis C. Uh, so the full question, if people missed it, um, RFK Jr. says he's not scared of germs because he used to snort coke off of toilet seats. Years later, he develops fatigue and mildly elevated AST and ALT. Which virus is most associated with intranasal cocaine use? The answer is hepatitis C, because you can get microabrasions of the nasal mucosa, especially when sharing straws or equipment. In there, you get higher blood exposure, which is more likely to transmit hepatitis C. And I love that this question was phrased like a medical licensing exam test question. That really made my day. I might start including more um, questions of the week in this as well, and then using them in trivia. So if you are here, write down this answer because this may be a trivia question coming soon. But with that, that is the end of the show today. Thank you everybody for being here. I have not yet decided the topic for next week's medical myths, but I will let you know as soon as possible. There are so many good myths to address. RFK Jr. is just doing so many more things, and it might be a topic that comes up this week. Who knows? But tomorrow I will be on Talk Heathen, and then we have Star Wars tomorrow evening. So join us for that. And then once again next week I'll be on Ember's show, and then Medical Miss and all these shows all over again. So thank you everybody for being here. I really appreciate it. Please don't forget to like, comment, and subscribe. Share this out with everybody. Uh, Everything really, really does help. And thank you to our patrons and channel members for keeping this content going. It really does help, especially in this period where I'm in between jobs. So your support is greatly appreciated. And thanks again, everybody. We'll see you in the next one.